Okay, welcome back, everybody. Okay, time to introduce our next speaker, and I'm delighted to be reacquainted again with Jane Reilly. She's well known to me. She was a former hire of mine. I'm delighted to see Jane has progressed extremely well. She is now the Vice President of Product Development. She's head of the Irish lab of Arc Energy, which is an Irish-Italian company. They are a software company developing products that service the energy trading markets. So Jane is going to give us a presentation on the work she's doing and the company are doing on predictive analysis for energy pricing, I think. Over to you, Jane. And just one thing about Jane. Apparently, she got thrown out of a choir for singing at one stage. So you might explain how that happened during the course of our conversation.
If I run out of things to say, I might sing. How about that one? My name is Jane, and I work at Arc Energy. We're based in Longford, and we work in the energy sector. Just to follow on a little bit from David's talk, we've actually recently become a member of CEDAR. So we're hoping to get full use of your deep learning in our space. But today I'm going to talk more about predicting short-term energy prices. But before I do, I just want to explain a little bit more about ARC, what we do, and the energy domain, because it's something that you wouldn't all be familiar with. So at ARC, we develop software solutions which enable companies operating within the energy sector to mitigate their exposure to changing prices in the energy market. Our core product, Artesian, is a powerful cloud... Sorry, he was shaking his head at me. It is powerful. Our core product, Artesian, is a powerful cloud-based time series data warehouse. And what it does is it automatically collects data from across Europe from various different data providers and exchanges. And what it does is collects this data and it converts it into a format which makes it readily available for further analysis. So typically Artesian is used by energy traders on the trading floor. And what they do is they look at all the data available in Artesian, they select the curves that they're interested in, and then they extract these, and then they'll input them into other tools such as Excel or MATLAB and perform some further analysis. We have another product which provides some ready-made analysis, and this is our European energy platform called K4View. And what that does is that it enables clients to see what's going on in the market in an easily visible and accessible manner. They can look at it on the web, on their phone, and on their tablets. And in terms of where we're going now with our projects and future, what we have been looking at recently, can you hear me when I move my head that way? It sounds different to me, sorry. What we've been looking at is the problem of predicting short-term energy prices. And the motivation for this is that it enables our clients to make better informed decisions. So if they had reliable predictions of the short-term energy prices ahead of time, then, as an example, industrial consumers could perhaps optimize their manufacturing to minimize their costs, so they'd use their to do the tasks which involve a lot of energy at times when energy would be cheaper. It enables energy traders to maximize their margin, and it obviously would enable providers to maximize their profits. There are a couple of quirks in the energy market that are not obvious when you're not dealing with the data every day. And the first one of which is that electricity cannot be stored in large quantities. So once it's been generated, it must be used. And in order to balance the grid, we need to balance our production and our consumption of energy on a second-per-second basis. Now, Tesla in Australia are currently working on a 100-megawatt battery. And when this does come to place, it will be a game changer. But for the moment, in the climate that we're currently working in Ireland and in the rest of the world, this doesn't exist. So when you go home in the evenings and you flick on a switch, you expect there to be power. So in terms of prediction and AI, we talk a lot about priors. And this means that we use knowledge of what happened in the past to predict what's going to happen in the future. And we make some observations about the current state of the world. And we use this together with our model, and then we get some estimate about what's going to happen. And we can add some weights and say some aspects are more or less important than others. But in the context of energy prices, if we train our models purely on historical prices, this doesn't fit, and we won't get a reliable estimate. And this is because there are a large number of input parameters to consider. And I guess referring back to deep learning and the fact that deep learning algorithms will learn what's going on in the data. In the approaches that we used and in the types of space that we're working on, there are so many parameters that and a lot of the analysis is actually deciding which parameters it is that are of interest. In terms of energy, we can look at infrastructure. So in Ireland specifically, in the way that our grids are, there's a lot of power lines beside the road, as an example. And if we get stormy weather, trees fall and power lines get cut. And this affects prices. Then there's the transmission capacity. So in Northern Ireland, with the interconnector with Scotland, that's been down for most of the time. It's been, I don't know, has it ever got to 500 megawatt? It came back online in February this year. And then there's the forecast of supply and demand. And then there's the interpersonal things and the utilization trends. So we have our peak off-peak patterns, which are standard enough. So in the morning, energy is cheaper. In the evening, energy is more expensive. And then there's some uniquely Irish and perhaps British as well aspects in that there are peaks when halftime during football matches or out of breaks in Corrie when people turn on the kettle. And then there are other aspects which can't be predicted, and these are geopolitical things, such as OPEC changing their prices, or in Ireland there's a move to use biomass instead of peat in our power stations. And then I guess topically at the moment there are the carbon emission rules that have been imposed, where we're looking at reducing the carbon footprint of the country, and what that means is that we'll looking to change the way that we generate our energy. But one of the major factors that we considered in our models was the weather. As you can see, this is July, and the sun is splitting the stones because it's warmer in the summer than it is in the winter, and we don't get as much rain. And if we were to believe that, our lives would be a little easier, but in Ireland, due to the notorious changeability of our weather, where we can have a sunny, rainy, windy day, and there might be a bit of snow in there also, it's quite difficult to predict the output from renewables. And there are behavioral changes also when the weather changes. So if it's sunny, then people go outside more, which means we need less energy to light and heat buildings. And then we have these uniquely dull days here where there's no rain or there isn't any wind either. And this means that there's a low output from renewables. And another thing about AI and and machine learning is the reliability of our data source, that we need to be able to trust our data. And as you may know, that the weather forecast is often a suggestion rather than a fact. And some people put their faith in Evelyn Cusack, and some people trust the methods of the Donegal postman. And even at times for special occasions, we ask the Child of Prague to impact the weather. And even last year, when I was training for the Dublin City Marathon, I put my faith in an app on my phone, which claimed very precise forecasts, such as it will stop raining in 12 minutes, or there will be a break in the rain in an hour. And at times it was right, at others, less so. But I guess when you are 3 miles into a 20-mile run, what's a bit of rain? So in terms of the energy markets, there are a couple of different views. There's long-term views and short-term views, and the weather has different impacts. Obviously, if it rains today, that doesn't really matter when we're looking at the quarter ahead or a season ahead or a year ahead. But when we're looking at the short-term markets, and they're the ones that we were focusing on in our prediction models, it makes a big difference. The two short-term markets that we focused on were the day ahead, which is energy for tomorrow, and the intraday, which is energy for later on today. And it was only when I was talking to Rachel during one of the preparation sessions, I know you're famous, that she brought up night saver electricity, which I'd completely forgotten about, and storage heating. And these were an ideal vehicle to explain the intraday and the day ahead markets. When I was in college here in Athlone, we had storage heaters in our apartment, and they were really simple. There was a dial which controlled the energy going in, another dial which control the rate of outflow of energy for the following day. So in a lot of ways, if you consider it, that operating the heating of your home using storage heating is a lot like your own day-ahead market, in that you make some assumptions and some decisions today, and you make some predictions about what's going to happen and what heat you will require tomorrow. So we can look at things like the weather forecast, so what weather, look out the window and see what's happening out there. You can see how you're feeling, how warm or cold you're actually feeling. You can look at the activities of the people in the house. And other things, like if you need to dry clothes, or if you have friends over for dinner, etc. And based on all of that, we make an assumption about the amount of heat we're going to need tomorrow. And we set our dial, and we're done. And then we wake up tomorrow, and we reassess the situation. So there's now a fixed amount of heat in there. We can't alter that, it's there. And we may have underestimated the amount of heat required. And at this stage, we'll turn on the boost mode, which can be very expensive, but in a lot of ways, it's similar to operating on the intraday market. We also may have overestimated the amount of heat we needed, and at which point we'll just open a window, which isn't very efficient, but it works. And I have to admit, in my own experience of storage heating, it was quite poor. I either had a cold house or a high bill, and more often than not, both. But in terms of small businesses and home users, they're very much at the mercy of energy providers in terms of the cost of your bill. You can install some smart meters or smart monitors or prepay meters. But in terms of predicting the future and future energy utilization, there's not much you can do in the home, aside from looking at things such as level pay. So the way level pay works is that your utility provider analyzes your previous electricity usage and averages it out. It's arbitrary, there's no science involved, it's just a simple average. And this is the amount that you pay per month, and they reassess it periodically. At home, I use level pay. And what it means for me is that I can leave my Christmas lights on for most of the Christmas period, and I don't need to fear the January bill. Or if I turn on the immersion and forget to turn it off, I don't come out in a cold sweat. Or if my better half decides to take some of my hints and maybe do some power washing or some DIY, that I won't have a big bill coming in the post, which might dissuade him from this kind of thing in the future. But in terms of medium or large enterprises, they need a lot more reliability about their energy bills than this. So what they want to do is they want to be able to minimize, the industrial energy consumers want to be able to minimize their costs, and the energy producers want to maximize their profits. So if we just focus in on the manufacturing consumer example, and assume that we're running a manufacturing plant, and we make some good quality product, we work on a single shift cycle, so that means we're operating in peak energy mode. And we're lucky enough to have a standard regular order book. And we know up ahead, so at the beginning of the year when we're doing our financial planning for the full year, we know up ahead that we're going to use 4 megawatt hour peak load for the entire year. So what we do at that stage is we contact our energy trader and we purchase the product for 4 megawatt hour peak load for the year. And we're fine, that's fixed. So when we're doing it, we don't need to worry about fluctuations in the markets. We know what we're going to pay, and that's all fine and good. But in the scenario where we might get a new customer or we might have an increase in our orders, how do we manage that? How do we power this new manufacturer? So at this stage, we have two options. We can ring up our energy provider, and let's just say we need 1 megawatt hour for 2 weeks. What we can do is purchase a product for that. Or we can risk it to the short-term markets and see what's happening on the day we need it. In the past, when there was a strong link between commodity prices and the price of energy, we'd look at what was happening at the commodity market, and this would help us with our decision. But now that we're throwing in renewables into the mix, this has changed, and it's no longer, the correlation has become skewed. So you might be wondering what's in front of me here and what it's all about, and I'm about to enlighten you. So with the help of my volunteers, who are going to come up now, sorry. We're going to give you, we're going to provide you with a simplified view of the world. So first I'm going to introduce Brian here is our power plant. Paul is our skyscraper factory. And Owen is our wind farm. So the way that we're working, in order to make his fantastic skyscrapers, Paul requires 1 unit of electricity. So this is the unit of electricity that Brian is going to produce, and Owen, I'm gone a little off script, so I'm after confusing Owen, this is the units of electricity that Owen is going to produce. There is no difference in reality between the type of energy produced by renewables or by power plants. The grid doesn't know. I raided my child's playroom, and this is all the Lego I had. So in order for Paul to build his skyscraper, for 1 unit of electricity, he then converts it into 1 building block. So in the traditional view of the world, what we would have done is that Paul and Brian would have created a contract. And that would mean that Brian would supply energy to Paul at a standard rate, steady rate, for an agreed price, and then Paul would build a skyscraper. So we let this play out, and we maybe a slower steady rate would work a little bit better. A constant supply that Paul is well able to handle.
Between 2 by combined cycle.
So we pause this for a moment, and we'll introduce, so Owen here, as I said, is our wind farm. And the problem with wind is that you can't produce it at a steady rate. So instead, so what we're going to do instead is that Owen is going to, for every 10 rotations, or approximately, Owen is going to pass 1 unit of electricity to Paul. It's important to note that Brian is still passing electricity at a steady rate. Yeah, and Paul is going to accept electricity from both sides. And it's important to note that there is a steady wind, so we've nothing to worry about at the moment. So let's just say we had a change in our weather forecast, and now there's loads of wind. So Owen is efficiently producing a lot of wind here. And and as you can see, our tower is coming up at a rapid rate, but Paul is so if we just pause for a moment and let Paul regroup for a second. So what we're trying to illustrate there, and I'm not quite sure whether I got across, but I'll just explain it a little, is that what happened here is that there was too much energy flowing. Paul wasn't able to handle it, so around the time his tower fell, that was a power surge. So obviously this is not something that we want to happen. But given the recent events, they've highlighted with Paul that there was a flaw in his skyscraper design. And now he's decided that given the extra energy available through all of this amazing wind generation, that he's going to reinvest in stronger materials to create an even more stable an even more stable skyscraper. The difference is that this new building block now requires 2 units of electricity. So if we continue as we were, we now have a steady rate of wind, a steady rate of power, and there's a nice wind coming from this side. And we can see that Paul's new, more stable factory his new, more stable skyscraper is building nicely. But if we just pause for a second, and what would happen in this scenario if we stop? So if the wind stops. So we no longer have any wind from this side. And we were in this scenario here where Paul no longer has sufficient energy to produce this skyscraper. He no longer has sufficient energy to produce his skyscraper. And so the building comes to a standstill. Thanks, guys. that. It would have been a nice side effect if we'd actually hit my boss there with a brick. But anyway, the aim of that was to give you some insights in terms of energy and renewable energy and the way that renewable energy affects the grid. But obviously we were talking here about predicting prices, and you might be wondering, how does this impact prices? Well, there was a real-world example of how too much renewable energy production affected prices in Germany on the 8th of May in 2016. And what happened on that specific day is that there was so much sun and wind that the hydro, solar and wind farm sites in the country produced 80% of the overall demand, whereas normally in Germany it only produced 20%. At the time, to manage the grid, what happened is the prices fell to minus 130 euro per megawatt hour. I think that it fell as low as 160 euro, minus 160 euro per megawatt hour at times. And you can see, just to put this into context, in the Irish market, a megawatt hour sells for approximately 60 euro. So you can see this is a huge loss. So this kind of highlights the extent or the issues that we may encounter, especially in the Irish case, and we're moving towards using more renewable energy. So in terms of how we calculate the energy price, in Ireland we have a single energy market, and this is administered by the single energy market operator. It just rolls off the tongue, that one. And obviously there are, like I mentioned before, there are daily trends in the prices, so they're cheaper in the morning and they're more expensive between 4:30 and 7 p.m. And to keep the bills low, the cheapest generators are scheduled to run. And the decisions as to which generators are scheduled is made the day before the physical energy is actually produced. And what happens there is each generator submits a cost bid for every 30 minutes of the following day. And with this, along with estimated usage, is used to come up with an approximate system marginal price for each half hour. But the actual price itself isn't set until 4 days later, because we need to factor in real-time events, which we obviously can't predict. And I guess that's the problem we're trying to solve with this, is that we're trying to get a reliable estimate of the price ahead of time. And this would enable our generators to get more profit, and like we were saying before, our customers to get a lower cost. So as we mentioned earlier, that there are a lot of influencing factors on the price, and we focused on the weather. It was a good opportunity for us to try out an adaptive approach that could potentially be extended to other geographical areas. As inputs, we took data from Meteor Group and from CMO, and we used our own tool, Artesian, to normalize and convert this into 30-minute level of granularity. And this enabled us to look at things such as the weather, the seasonality, historical demand and production, and estimated demand and production alongside historical price. We experimented with lots of different techniques, but we found that our combination of principal component analysis and artificial neural networks performed the best. And we got an overall fit of about 70% with our model. And when we plotted the two curves of the actual price and the predicted price side by side, we found that we got an overall fit in terms of the shape. It differentiated when there was a sharp increase in price or there was a sharp decrease in price, but generally the models rectify themselves. This proof of concept resulted in a number of academic papers and appraising the various techniques, and one journal paper is currently in production. Now, the problem is not solved, but I think we're going in the right direction. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the organisers for their help, and thanks to my lovely volunteers for being so cooperative.
Okay. Very good. Any questions? My lovely assistant here, Pat, will take it from the back part of the floor.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, really interesting talk. I was just wondering, you're using weather data, and the weather is predicted probably using strong AI or machine learning or whatever. So were you just taking their results, or were you almost second-guessing them and doing your own analysis on the weather?
We got our data from a European data provider called Meteor Group.
Okay, so you
So they... I'm handing it over to my boss, who signed that contract.
So we didn't, yeah, works. We didn't actually model the output of the power plants in Ireland. So Meteor Group has a service where they modeled the technical details of the wind farms or the different types of power plants, coal, oil, peat, and how they're affected by weather. So it was the output of that model, so the predicted power output affected by weather that we took as an input to our model.
Okay, so you take the weather from the weather service as one of your inputs.
We take the weather from the weather service filtered through a model that interprets how much power is going to be produced in the country according to that weather.
Okay, thank you.
You might want to hang on to that, Francesco.
Thanks.
Thanks. I was just wondering, how would you expect things like smart grids and more distributed power generation to affect your work?
So we don't actually sell energy. What we do is we enable people to buy, and we provide the information. So I guess to answer your question, we would just update our data and we would get it from the providers which gave that information.
Is it off? No. I suppose smart grids also will give better, will allow for better modeling of consumption. So as an input rather than projections, you would have much more accurate, higher granularity data to base yourself upon.
Any other questions?
Hi Jen, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I see you again. I'm just wondering, do you mean like in your model to use the weather data to forecast the market price? Does that mean you shift the relationship between the weather and the supply side to the weather, to the relationship between the weather and the price?
I guess given the talk and the constraints I was given by the organisers, what I was looking at tonight really was more of a motivator. So I was explaining the impacts. I guess you've read the paper, so you know the specifics.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Of how we actually did it. I guess we can follow up with those questions after, but for this particular context, what I was looking at more was the motivators.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, so setting the scene as such.
As you're probably aware, the ISIM market is coming down in 2018. How the ISIM market is coming down in 2018. How do you see your model working with that? When you'll have to predict the 36 hours that you need energy and what you can supply going forward.
I'm going to throw that one directly at Francesco.
Well, one of the underlying reasons for using an adaptive model was to effectively be able to retrain to changing market conditions. So we've used Ireland as a nice example for an adaptive model because it's an island, it's a reasonably isolated environment, and it's only got 2 interconnections to nearby countries, to the UK. Now, the next step is to take this model and then try it in different markets in Europe, try it in Italy at the zonal level where the markets actually work in a slightly different way, try it in Germany where they're moving more towards continuous negotiation. So, I mean, changing market conditions hopefully will be catered for by retraining the model.
We have refit, okay, where all the wind turbines get a subsidy for 15 years while they're being built. Okay, so they get a set price going forward. And is that going to continue, do you think? Or do you think we're going to have a different refit system for solar, roof solar or farm solar?
On that, I'm not sure, but that kind of political decision is usually embedded into the price signal, which is the market result that you see. So an adaptive algorithm that works on price signal and on a number of other factors, such as the impact of meteorological factors on power production, potential outages of interconnections, remit declared outages of power plants, will or should adapt to the political signals by observing the markets. It will not predict that. So on changeover day, it will lag. I don't know if I've answered your question, I think.
I suppose I'm unique. I'm a power trader, okay? So I have a power trading license. Okay. So I supply about 30,000 customers. So I would have lived through all the changes in the market. So also the green energy gets preference. That's where the big issue is. And you can't...
It's the same in Italy. I mean, renewables get priority of dispatch.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that decision were to change, that would have an impact on the price, but then the market would adjust to that price level and the algorithm would adjust to that.
Yeah, the problem is that you have some days, as the girl pointed out, you have an abundance of wind, right? So it upsets the market in real time.
So that is one of those reasons to build an algorithm like that. It sounds like you might be interested in a system.
It sounds like you might be interested in my company.
It's a win-win.
I think just one more question, and we better wrap up this section. Okay. This is the second time the tyranny of leaving the immersion on came up with these tech talk series. It's absolutely deeply embedded in the Irish psyche, the immersion being left on. So listen, thanks very much to Jane for a great presentation. Thanks very much to the backup from Francesco. And really the very best of luck to Arc Energy. I hope you become a raging success. Thank you very much. Okay.